Financial markets in turmoil.
What are the root causes of the financial crisis?
The dollar losing value.
Heading for its biggest loss in nearly 3 decades.
Will Social Security even be there?
I don't know.
Buy or rent?
That's a very good question.
Interest rates.
I'm not so sure.
Where do you put your money?
I don't know.
Welcome to the show that answers your questions. This is Follow the Money Weekly with your host, economist, and best-selling author. Here's Jerry Robinson.
So we defend Saudi Arabia. Every time there's a problem, we send our ships, we go crazy, right? We spend a fortune. We get paid peanuts for this. They're making $1 billion a day. I'm not saying don't defend them. I'm saying we have to be reimbursed. We have to be paid when we do this.
We're 15 years ago. We went after Iraq. They did not knock down the World Trade Center, okay? It wasn't the Iraqis that knocked down the World Trade Center. We went after Iraq. We decimated the country. Iran's taken over. Okay. But it wasn't the Iraqis. You will find out who really knocked down the World Trade Center because they have papers in there that are very secret. You may find it's the Saudis, okay? But you will find out. It wasn't the Iraqis that knocked down the World Trade Center. You may find it's the Saudis, okay? But you will find out.
That, of course, the voice of GOP frontrunner Donald Trump. Donald Trump speaking about Saudi Arabia and our relationship with Saudi Arabia. In fact, there was a story put out in the New York Times underneath a very interesting title. In Donald Trump's worldview, America comes first and everybody else pays. That's the title of the article. In fact, we have a link to it on today's show notes. Welcome, friends, to Follow the Money Weekly. So glad that you are joining us today. As you can tell, we'll be talking first off about Trump and about his calls to make Saudi Arabia pay, substantially reimburse the United States for combating ISIS in the region. You know, it's so ironic, friends, today, as we take a look and we see what's happening in the Middle East and we see the odd relationship that permeates the United States and Saudi Arabia and the United States and the Middle East in general. Lots of backroom deals, lots of CIA deals that have gone on over the years. Of course, the Petrodollar system in play. And now here we have, as we are now, nearing $20 trillion in national debt. And as our military has become so deteriorated, although we have spent so much money on our military, nevertheless, there is so much fraud in our military for one of the reasons why we need to audit the Pentagon in addition to the Federal Reserve. And here we have a frontrunner in the GOP. I have never in my life heard a GOP frontrunner talk about Saudi Arabia the way that Donald Trump is talking about. Listen to this very first sentence in this New York Times piece that we'll link to on today's show notes. Here's what it says. Donald J. Trump, the Republican presidential frontrunner, said that if elected, he might halt purchases of oil from Saudi Arabia and other Arab allies unless, now listen to this, unless they commit ground troops to the fight against ISIS or substantially reimburse the United States for combating the militant group, which threatens their stability. What a way to open up the New York Times article. It's a very interesting read. I encourage you to read it. But again, think about this. From our perspective here as U.S. citizens, from our perspective here as individuals who are watching this race and, of course, are understanding the insidious relationship that exists between the United States and Saudi Arabia, here we have not some crazy GOP candidate who stands no chance of winning, right? Not Ron Paul, unfortunately, who's speaking truth. But instead you have Donald Trump, who is at the front runner position in the GOP, and he is saying that Saudi Arabia not only is likely involved in 9/11, which we've been promoting here on this podcast for years. We need to open up the 28 pages that have been sealed from the Americans' viewpoint. That's exactly what Trump was talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, 28 pages, just Google it. We've also done radio shows on the 28 pages here at our website. Just Google our website or, Google on a search engine, find out more about these 28 pages. And you'll see that who financed 9/11 is just interestingly left out of the 9/11 Commission report, right? It's not that important. Who paid for it? Oh, we don't really care about that, apparently. Well, we follow the money here at this organization, and we are very curious who funded and financed 9/11, as every other American likely is. Although the 9/11 Commission report decided after they found out who was involved in funding it, they weren't so crazy about revealing that to the public, so they sealed it away, locked it up. President Bush said, no, we can't talk about that. And then President Barack Obama came in promising that he was going to reveal these 28 pages. And again, still no movement on revealing and unveiling these 28 pages to find out who exactly financed 9/11. Those who have read the documents, people like Senator Bob Graham of Florida and others, have written books warning the American public of what is contained in those pages. Nevertheless, the mainstream media, the neocons, much of the GOP party, and of course the Democratic Party have this absolute fascination, unhealthy fascination with Iran. Iran, by the way, who has a much, much smaller military than Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia with the third fastest growing military on the face of the planet. They have twice as many helicopters, twice as many aircraft, twice as many attack helicopters, twice as many attack aircrafts, twice as many transport aircrafts. And while Iran spends $6 billion on its military every single year, Saudi Arabia spends more in the range of $56 billion, about 10 times more than Iran. Nevertheless, the mainstream media is breathless in its attacks upon Iran. Could it be that the Saudi lobby has, of course, infiltrated the U.S. media to constantly say good things about our precious Arab allies, all the while maligning Iran, who also happens to be the arch nemesis of our Arab allies? But Donald Trump's statement here about making Saudi Arabia pay for our military support, or we're not going to purchase oil from them anymore, is an absolute checkmate. Saudi Arabia, by the way, the one who has one of the worst human rights violations on the planet. If you're caught with a Bible in Saudi Arabia, you could be beheaded or put in prison for a very, very long time. If you're caught preaching anything else besides radical Islam, then you are also subject to death and or imprisonment. That's our good buddy in the Middle East. And what Trump has suggested, in essence, turns the petrodollar system on its head. And this is why I would imagine that the folks in Washington are scurrying around like rats on the Titanic, scared to death that Trump is going to bring. You know what they're concerned? I want to talk about this Islam thing with Trump, but let me just say this again, because I don't know if people are understanding this. The reason why Washington is terrified of Donald Trump is because he is bringing in people from all across the country who hardly ever vote, right? Or maybe have never voted. And if you listen to GOP politicians or Democratic politicians, they're very, very happy with the kind of turnout they have. It's very low, but they like that turnout. They don't want all kinds of people showing up at the voting booths in November, because that really shakes up their chances of their only incentive in life, and that is, if you're a politician, re-election. You see, these politicians don't want to improve our relationships in the Middle East. They don't want to improve our relationships with China. They don't want to improve our trade relations with the world. All they want to do is be re-elected. And if they can get that, that's all they care about. So Ted Cruz, if he gets in, he won't bring in too many crazies out into the voting booths. Hillary Clinton, she's safe. Bernie Sanders, he's a little bit renegade. Really don't want him winning in the Democratic side. You can see that from the Democratic media. They are extremely, and I say Democratic, I'm talking about a lot of the mainstream media, that is very much in the bag for Hillary. And they certainly do not want Bernie Sanders, being the front runner and becoming the nominee, because he will have the same impact. You see, in the end, it's not really about changing the country, because if it was, they would have got something done over the last 20 years. Instead, what it's about is running the country into the ground and extracting as much wealth for themselves as they can before the whole thing goes down in flames. That is the MO of Washington, D.C. And the last thing that these paid career politicians want is somebody like a Donald Trump or a Bernie Sanders that comes in, tips over the apple cart, refuses to play in the sandbox and actually demands that our allies have some sort of skin in the game when it comes to you sending your child over to fight in a war. I mean, I just love it. I just love it. I love seeing a politician, and listen, I'm not a huge fan of Donald Trump. I mean, again, you know I'm a political atheist. I don't really have a dog in the fight, so to speak. But I got to give it for Donald Trump on this one, okay? When he stands up to Saudi Arabia publicly and says, listen, if you don't, listen, because Saudi Arabia, they're the ones spawning all of the terror across the region of the Middle East. Where do you think ISIS came from? Where do you think they came from? What's their ideology? Now, let me give you an example. Let's say that you attend a Pentecostal church, okay? Let's just use a real quick illustration. You attend a Pentecostal church, and the name of the Pentecostal church is the name of your city. Let's say you live in a city called, Fayetteville, okay? So you live in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and you go to the Fayetteville Pentecostal Church, okay? The next thing you see is a bunch of renegade people running around with bandanas on and guns in their hand, killing all of your people in your town. And guess who they are associated with? The Pentecostal Church in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Okay, I'm not picking on Fayetteville, North Carolina, but I'm just saying, imagine that, okay? Would you be able to put a connection between those two? Would you be able in your mind to say, I wonder what they're teaching over at the Fayetteville, North Carolina Pentecostal Church? Wouldn't that kind of enter your mind? Wouldn't you want to know what they were teaching, considering that there are guys all over the state of North Carolina running around with guns and bandanas saying that they love God and they're prophets of God and they want to kill you for their religion, okay? You would probably want to investigate that Pentecostal church, wouldn't you? I think so. Well, where do you think that ISIS comes from? What is their ideology? Their ideology, and listen to this, and you probably know, most of our audience knows this, but there's many people who are new. Listen to this. The ideology that is espoused by ISIS is Wahhabism. It is the same exact religion, to the T, to the letter, that is espoused in the madrasas all across Saudi Arabia. It is the same radical form of Islam that dominates and influences the Saudi royal family. So when Trump says, listen, when you guys spawn terror all over the Middle East region and it's everywhere, and then you want us to take our children, our young boys, our young daughters, and send them over to the Middle East to go fight your terror spawns who believe exactly what you do, except they're just more radical, right? Because they just have a gun and they've got a group and they've broken off from Saudi. Whose problem is this? Whose problem is ISIS? Well, let's go back to our Fayetteville, North Carolina illustration. Whose problem are the crazies, right, in our little idea or our little scenario and illustration of these guys running around with Uzis in North Carolina? Whose problem is that? Well, if they represent that Pentecostal church, I think we know the answer, right? It's the Pentecostal church that needs to go find out, why are you guys running around in our name? What are you doing? We need to put an end to this, right? Saudi Arabia has a similar role. When there are people like ISIS running around claiming the same exact religious ideology, holding to the same exact laws, holding to the very same exact ideology and ideas and religion, I think it's very clear that ISIS is a problem of Saudi Arabia. And so what Trump has done is he has checkmated Saudi Arabia by saying this: if I'm president, you will clean up ISIS and you will get it under control and you will shed your own people's blood for this to clean up this mess, or we're not buying any more oil from you, period. Now, if you think that's a bad idea, then you must really enjoy the idea of sending your son and your daughter over to fight Saudi Arabian terror spawns, right? So this is one of those crazy things that Donald Trump has said that really could possibly stick. You see, if you're a neocon and you really love going over and seeing America bomb the region of the Middle East, but if you're also a fiscal conservative in the fact that you're staring at our nearly $20 trillion national debt, this idea should make all the sense in the world to you, right? If you're a neocon who loves war and you also want to see fiscal conservatism and you consider yourself a fiscal conservative, this is an idea made in heaven. Get other people to pay for it. Get other people to lay down their lives for it if they want it, right? But no matter how many times Donald Trump says this, even though I'm hoping it will stick, it doesn't seem to. Nobody ever asks him about Saudi Arabia. If you notice that, the media just won't touch it. They love to ask him about Iran, though. The media is in the bag for destroying Iran. They're fine with that. They love to talk about Iran and how terrible it is and how the influence that it has in the Middle East is absolutely atrocious. But when it comes to Saudi Arabia, all of a sudden people are quiet. I even noticed this week that feminists, right? People who claim that, women should be empowered. They are silent. Notice this. You'll find this to be the case. And I'm not blaming all feminists, but many feminists, and this was especially true in a recent CNN debate that I saw, where feminists are absolutely positively silent about Islam's treatment of women, right? Islam has a terrible track record of treating women terrible. I mean, terrible human rights violations. If you go into their country, you'll find that many of them can't drive. Many of them can't leave their house without their husband. They have to be completely covered in garb. They can't let their bodies be seen in any way, shape, or form, not even a piece of skin in any way, shape, or form. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? To you and me, but apparently not to feminists, right? Because they don't want to offend the sensibilities of Islam. They want to be politically correct and say, well, everybody to each his own. But notice, and this blows my mind about the whole thing, is that whenever Islam is carrying out its law, apparently the feminists are fine. But if Christians or Jews have any kind of gender roles that they consider to be out of place, then feminists all of a sudden have a real big opinion about that, right? But what's so ironic is that Islam is not new, it's not original. It borrowed almost everything from the Old Testament, from the Torah and from other areas. And so if you go back and read about Islam, you'll find that he was heavily, Muhammad, the guy who started it, was heavily influenced by the Jews. He, in fact, even prayed towards Jerusalem until he got mad at the Jews, and then he started praying towards Mecca, right? So they were actually very friendly towards the Jews. Islam adopted many of the Jewish laws. And so when Islam enacts Jewish laws or Judeo-Christian laws, which they borrowed from us, when they enact those, it's okay to the feminists, right? But whenever the Judeo-Christian folks implement it, they say, oh no, that's terrible. We can't do that. It's so ironic. The irony here is so thick. Of course, some will always point back to Israel and say, well, Jerry, Iran wants to attack Israel and Saudi Arabia wants to defend it. Who attacked Israel in 1948 in the Independence War? Well, Saudi Arabia. Who attacked Israel in 1948 at its War of Independence, right whenever it became a nation? Saudi Arabia, not Iran. Iran was nowhere to be seen. How about 1967 for the war, the 6-Day War? Who was involved in that? Saudi Arabia, not Iran, right? And you go down the list, 1973, and you just keep going on, and you'll notice that Iran has been very, very muted in its responses to Israel, whereas Saudi Arabia has been its arch enemy. But people who defend Israel are pro-Saudi Arabia and anti-Iran. I mean, this is Twilight Zone. We live in what has to be called the Twilight Zone. And now here comes Donald Trump shaking the gates, standing at the gates and threatening the petrodollar system. As friends, we have told you about this for a long time. It's coming. The explosion between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. We are not friends. We are not allies. It is a false alliance. It is a false relationship. It is not real. Saudi Arabia are oil-rich theocrats. We have nothing in common with them. And as to why we should be fighting their wars in the Middle East is beyond me. So kudos to GOP frontrunner Donald Trump. Kudos to Trump. Of course, just because he says it doesn't mean that he will do it. But nevertheless, thank goodness that language like this is finally finding its way into the mainstream media. Of course, don't expect the mainstream media to ask Trump about Saudi Arabia. Don't expect them to bring it up. But they'll bring up Iran. And when they do, Trump might bring up Saudi Arabia. So good for him. All right, so I want to shift gears here, and I want to bring on Jim Rickards. He is the author of The New Case for Gold. We'll talk about gold with Jim Rickards right on the other side of this break. Hold tight.